election headquarters.
Welcome back. We're less than a week from Election Day, and we've got a breakdown of the constitutional amendments so you're prepared when you hit the polls. Capitol reporter Shannon Hecht brings us the details for the 4 amendments on the ballot.
Amendment 1 looks to clarify when the legislature can take up vetoed bills when they've begun a different session. Last year, after the redistricting session, lawmakers weren't sure if they can begin a veto override session without ending the regular session early.
If you leave it as it is, you can still probably do what you're doing, but everyone's not sure that that's how the law should work.
Amendment 2 would clear away some defunct funds. They include funds that are now empty or were found unconstitutional.
Voters voted on all of these things. They got 2/3 vote at some point and a majority vote. So the issue is maybe we keep them around and they could turn into something in the future.
Amendment 3 would create an additional property tax exemption for first responders.
This isn't mandatory, and it doesn't have to be the whole $25,000. They can set their own policy.
Some see it as a way to help retain first responders. Those against it say they should be given higher pay instead. Amendment 4 would put strict parameters of when the legislature can dip into the Revenue Stabilization Fund. Not to be confused with the Rainy Day Fund, this pot of money is set aside for emergencies to fill budget holes. This change would still allow lawmakers to dip into it with some boxes to be checked first.
With a 2/3 vote, up to $250 million to essentially plug a budget hole once you've already tapped the rainy day fund.
Early voting lasts until November 11th, and Election Day is the 18th. For your local election headquarters, I'm Shannon Hecht.
In Washington, a government shutdown is looming. In fact, there are only a few days left. The Senate and House must work to bring a compromise together. Washington correspondent Basil John reports as the clock is ticking on Congress.
Another deadline to avoid a government shutdown is steadily approaching.
We're working earnestly on that.
House Speaker Mike Johnson says his party is determined to avoid a government shutdown.
I believe all Republicans want to get to the same end.
GOP lawmakers like Nebraska Congressman Don Bacon and Virginia Congresswoman Jen Kiggins say they support the Speaker's goal.
I'd probably do a straight CR through mid-January, late January.
We're looking at all the options, but we can't shut down the government. We have to fully fund the military.
This isn't productive right now.
But California Democratic Congressman Pete Aguilar says Republicans are wasting time with bills that cut programs that Americans rely on.
These are bad policy bills. We should be talking about that in addition to what the Republican plan is in the next 10 days to fund government.
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer says the only way forward is to push through a bipartisan solution.
If Republicans inject partisanship into otherwise bipartisan priorities, that is only going to make it harder to avoid a shutdown.
And Pennsylvania Democratic Senator Bob Casey agrees and urges House Republicans to follow the example from Senate Republicans.
Support a bipartisan effort to fund the government and to make these critical investments that we have in the supplemental.
Reporting in Washington, I'm Basil John.
U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy looking to stop anti-Semitism and violence on college campuses. I'll talk to him about how he plans to do that next.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to This Week in Louisiana Politics. When the Israel-Hamas war began, U.S. leaders started noticing a rise in attacks against Jewish college students. This was happening all across the country, even right here in Louisiana. U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, says he wants to put a stop to it. He joins us now. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, Fred, thanks for having me on, and thanks for talking about such an important topic.
You bet. So let's get started. On a federal level, what can be done about the violence?
There's the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education. which is responsible for protecting, making sure that kids, students, if you got a certain background, you're supposed to be protected. The issue, do kids know to complain to this hotline? Oh, yes, I have been kind of persecuted, if you will, beat up, put in a room and people banging on the door at my university, number one. Are the universities telling them? Are the universities reporting it? And if all that is the case, is this Office of Civil Rights actually taking the enforcement action that of requiring the universities to protect these students? So our committee is trying to have oversight, trying to understand that.
So you really had a roundtable meeting with some Jewish students and some academia. How did that go?
It went extremely well. And it's interesting. They're emphasizing, for example, one young lady, that the diversity, equity, inclusion agenda is portrays in her school in California Jewish people as the oppressor and others as the oppressed. Now, it's not an individual. They're not treating people as individuals. They're treating people as a class. Everything that I was taught not to do, going to church, growing up, this DEI agenda is teaching people to do. The other thing it pointed out that that there are professors. Actually, this is something that she had written that I read before the committee hearing. There are professors losing their job because they will defend somebody wearing a Halloween costume that somebody was offended by. Literally losing their job as a professor. And yet here we have professors signing letters celebrating that Hamas killed 1,300 Jews, and nothing happens to them. Now, maybe something shouldn't happen to them, but clearly, if here we're talking about celebrating the death of 1,300 Jews, and there we're talking about a Halloween costume, that society's a little bit out of kilter. So what is the environment that has led to this kind of being really a strange situation?
Now, I know you had, you said you described the roundtable meeting as a success. You had asked for a hearing because you're a member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. You had asked the chairman, Bernie Sanders, to hold a hearing. For whatever reason, that didn't happen. What do you think could be done in a hearing that can't be done in a roundtable?
Well, so my Democratic colleagues who came today wanted to make sure that we were making sure that a Palestinian student would not feel bullied at their campus. So I think my Democratic colleagues were asking to have a little bit wider breadth of what the conversation was about. Secondly, we did not have the ability to call somebody from President Biden's Office of Civil Rights. We had one who had served under a former head of that division who served under former President Trump. Now, he gave insight, but what we really want to know is what's happening now. And if we had the chair kind of agreeing with me to issue a subpoena, we could have had that more kind of real-time information. So it gives you a little bit more teeth when you have a full committee hearing if the administration is not doing something to make sure they do. This was very good. It could still be better.
Do you think a hearing will take place eventually?
I wouldn't be surprised if now it would be. Again, we have 5, I think, of my Democratic colleagues show up. And as I mentioned, they're actually asking for a different sort of a hearing. Bernie Sanders, sometimes I suggest something, he doesn't care. If they suggest something, maybe he'll care more likely.
A lot of people, especially here in Louisiana, were surprised to see some of this violence play out on the campus, or at least near the campus of Tulane University. How do you think that situation was handled?
I thought that the university handled it very well. They were prepared. They had police officers from state police, campus police, and New Orleans City Police. They attempted to defuse the situation, and then they issued a statement condemning it afterwards. There was an initial altercation. Okay, that happened, and then it was broken up. So I think that the university handled it well.
I know there were some arrests made. Have you followed up with them to find out if any charges are being filed?
No, we followed up with President Fitz's office, the president of Tulane University. I've not asked about where the charges were filed, but I do know that since then, Tulane has been very aggressive at condemning the violence and at making sure that their campus is a peaceful place.
I know you said you don't have a hearing scheduled yet. You hope to in the future. You've had the roundtable meeting. What's next for your effort?
Well, we're going to continue to highlight this. By the way, this is just the latest of what we've done. I sent a letter to with one of my fellow senators, Joni Ernst, to the administration asking what they're doing. We're going to continue to ask the Office of Civil Rights, have you heard these complaints? If so, have you acted upon them? Next, we're going to ask the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education to mandate that a university, if they get a complaint from the student, to report that on the federal level. Secondly, that you begin to post flyers with the phone number so the student can directly call the Office of Civil Rights. I go into break rooms all over the place, and there are pieces of paper saying, if you feel like you've been discriminated against, call this number, and that is a federal mandate. I think it's reasonable to put that up in the student union so that students know. One of the women who testified from Stanford, very bright, very articulate, writes a lot, did not know that she could make a specific complaint to this office until she began to research for her article that she wrote. We need that not to be the case. We need every student to know.
All right, Senator Bill Cassidy, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Fred.
All right, stay with us. We'll be right back.